Imagine a patient who has been sick for years, not dying, not in crisis, but quietly unwell, running a low fever. Nobody takes seriously, ignoring symptoms, refusing the lifestyle changes the doctors recommend. And then one day, that patient walks into the operating room and demands the most radical surgery imaginable, not to treat the illness, to prove a point. That patient is the United Kingdom, one of the oldest, most powerful economies in human history. The country that invented the Industrial Revolution, the country that once ran a quarter of the entire world, the country that gave the world modern banking, modern law, modern democracy. And right now, it is the only G7 nation where real wages have flatlined for 15 years, where a family in Poland will likely be wealthier than a family in Britain by 2030, where the bond market collapsed so spectacularly in 2022 that it brought down a sitting prime minister in 44 days, not in an election, not in a scandal, removed by financial markets. This is not a recession. Economists have a different word for what is happening to Britain. They call it de-development, the slow, grinding, almost invisible reversal of wealth and capability in one of the world's most advanced economies, the quiet running in reverse of everything a century of progress built. And it didn't start with Brexit, but Brexit may have been the last bullet. In the 1970s, British newspapers called their own country the sick man of Europe. Strikes paralyzed industries for months, inflation raged out of control, rubbish piled uncollected in the streets. The International Monetary Fund had to bail out the British government in 1976. Then came Margaret Thatcher. Like her or hate her, she transformed the British economy. She killed the old industrial model and replaced it with something new: finance, services, the City of London. By the 1990s and 2000s, Britain was back, GDP growing, employment rising. London became the financial capital of Europe, arguably the world. Tony Blair's government radiated cool Britannia confidence, or so they thought, because the cure had a flaw, a fatal design error buried in the foundations that nobody wanted to examine too closely. And when the cracks appeared, Britain didn't fix them. Instead, in 2016, they voted for the most disruptive economic experiment any major democracy had attempted in modern history. Before we go any further, 3 numbers. Number 1, 15. The number of years real wages in the United Kingdom have effectively stagnated, not declined, not grown, just flat, a lost decade and a half of pay growth. Number 2, 10 to 15%, the permanent drop in business investment since the Brexit vote compared to the pre-2016 trend, not a temporary dip that recovered, a permanent structural reduction. Number 3, 2030, the year the Resolution Foundation projects that the average Polish family will have higher disposable income than the average British family. Problem 1 is what economists call the productivity crisis. Since the 2008 financial crisis, British productivity, meaning output per hour worked, has been among the worst in the developed world. Problem 2 is the financial casino model. When Thatcher restructured Britain in the 1980s, she made a deliberate choice: finance over manufacturing, the City of London over the factory floor. September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapses in New York, the global financial system seizes up over a single weekend. And Britain, having bet almost everything on finance, takes the hit harder than almost anyone. The result? Britain's public infrastructure starts to deteriorate visibly. NHS hospitals underfunded, roads filling with potholes, schools crumbling, the productive capacity of the state quietly hollowed out. And then June 23, 2016, the Brexit referendum, 52% to 48%, Leave wins. We are not here to relitigate the political arguments. Brexit is done. Britain is out. June 24, 2016, the morning after the vote, the British pound drops 10% against the dollar. Overnight, currency traders concluded without sentimentality that Britain had just made itself significantly less valuable. That single currency crash immediately made every import more expensive. Everything Britain buys from abroad, food, fuel, electronics, medicine, components, got 10% more expensive overnight. And what was coming? 3 years of political chaos, 3 prime ministers arguing about what Brexit even meant, a parliament deadlocked, businesses unable to plan anything, investment frozen solid. Here is what happens. When you introduce maximum uncertainty into an economy, capital goes on strike, businesses looking to invest, asked a simple question, is this country going to be a good place to operate in 5 years? Factories that would have been built in Birmingham were built in Poland instead. Research centers that would have opened in London opened in Amsterdam instead. The investment just went somewhere else. Research by the Center for European Reform estimated that by 2022, the British economy was already 5.5% smaller than it would have been if Brexit had not happened. A slow, invisible erosion. The growth that never happened, jobs that were never created, companies that were never started, the invisible recession, harder to see than a crash, in many ways, far more damaging. January 1st, 2021, Britain officially leaves the European Union single market. And this is where the theory meets the reality. No friction, no delay, no paperwork, now becomes something far more integrated. After Brexit, that same lorry stops at the border, customs declaration, phytosanitary checks, rules of origin certificates, sometimes hours of delay in queues stretching back miles, additional costs built into every shipment. For small and medium businesses, the ones that actually employ most British workers, it was devastating. Many simply stopped exporting to Europe. The paperwork cost more than the profit. The fish are still in British waters, but British fishermen cannot sell them. They have lost their main export market because the customs paperwork makes it economically unviable to export quickly enough. Fish rotting on British docks. 2022, global inflation hits. But Britain's inflation is different. Worse, more persistent, slower to come down. The United Kingdom becomes an outlier among its peers, running higher inflation for longer. Economists call this the Brexit tax. Every British consumer pays it every single day in every single shop, without seeing it labeled as such. Thousands of tiny invisible payments, a permanent reduction in living standards. The second reason is labor shortages. Before Brexit, Britain relied heavily on European workers. After Brexit, freedom of movement ended. Those workers went home or stopped coming. Overnight, gaps appeared across multiple sectors. Labor shortages push wages up, higher wages push prices up as businesses pass costs on to customers. The result was a Bank of England forced to raise interest rates more aggressively than it wanted to, squeezing out inflation through financial pain, which leads directly to the mortgage trap. Millions of ordinary families had to remortgage at exactly the moment interest rates hit their highest level in 15 years. Their monthly payment did not creep up, it doubled. September 23, 2022. New Prime Minister Liz Truss presents her mini-budget, £45 billion of tax reductions with no credible explanation. It is described with extraordinary confidence as a growth plan. The market reaction is instant, brutal, and historic. The pound crashes to its lowest level against the dollar since 1985 overnight. But worse than the currency, far worse, is what happens to the bond market. British government bonds begin selling in large quantities, panic selling, the kind of selling that happens to Argentina, to Turkey, to genuinely failing states, not to G7 founding members, not to one of the oldest financial institutions. The Bank of England was forced to intervene. British pension funds were hours away from insolvency. The entire UK pension system came within hours of crisis because a prime minister spent 48 hours trying to reassure markets. Liz Truss was gone in 44 days, the shortest prime ministership in British history, removed not by voters, not by her own party, by the bond market, by the judgment of international capital that her plans were incompatible with reality. Now let's talk about the doom loop, the self-reinforcing cycle that makes Britain's problems harder to escape with every year that passes. It starts with the National Health Service. Sicker workers produce a smaller economy. Today, 7.5 million people are on NHS waiting lists. Cancer patients wait so long their condition deteriorates. This is not doctors and nurses failing. This is a structural funding crisis driven by a shrinking tax base. And here is the doom loop. A dysfunctional health service means sicker workers. Sicker workers produce a smaller economy. A smaller economy generates less tax revenue. Less tax revenue means worse NHS funding, around and around. Britain is now recruiting nurses from India, Ghana, and the Philippines, skilled people doing vital work. But the cost of international recruitment is higher, and the implicit message sent to European professionals, "You are not wanted here," cannot be unsent. The people with the most options are leaving: highly skilled British citizens, doctors, engineers, researchers, financiers are leaving in record numbers for Canada, Australia, the United States, countries with higher salaries, better prospects. Immigration to Britain has actually increased since Brexit, an irony its architects have never adequately explained. Less high-skill European movement, more lower-wage immigration. Brexit promised to reduce immigration and improve quality. It achieved neither. So where are we now? What is the honest picture in 2025? GDP per capita in Britain is lower relative to the United States than it was a decade ago. Real wages for ordinary workers are still below their 2008 peak. Nearly 20 years of lost wage growth. The International Monetary Fund projects Britain will be the slowest growing G7 economy over the coming decade. The analysis suggesting Polish families will overtake British ones is not designed to provoke, it is the base case. Business investment remains 10 to 15% below the pre-Brexit trend. Companies built those facilities in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Ireland. Those are permanent losses. You cannot unspend investment that already went somewhere else. What would actually help? Let's be direct. Rejoining the European Union is not on the political table. Closer EU ties would help at the margins. Massive public investment in infrastructure and clean energy would increase productive capacity over time. None are quick, none are glamorous, none reverse the damage overnight, because that is the brutal truth about de-development. It takes a long time to fall, and it takes even longer and harder work to climb back up. Britain's decline is not irreversible. Britain still has extraordinary assets, world-class financial center, world-class universities, a creative, adaptable, fundamentally resilient population, the English language, which remains the global language of commerce. But decline, once it develops momentum, is self-reinforcing in ways that are hard to interrupt. Capital leaves, talented people leave, investment does not come, services deteriorate further, the spiral tightens. The question for Britain is not whether it can recover. It has done it before. It did it in the 1980s from a position of apparent irreversibility. It can do it again. The question is whether it has the political honesty, the patience, and the collective courage to do what recovery actually requires, which means in modern politics, doing the hardest thing of all, admitting that something did not work as promised. Britain was the sick man of Europe in the 1970s. It recovered. It became something genuinely impressive. It can recover again, but not through slogans, not through nostalgia, through the slow, unglamorous, honest work of rebuilding an economy that actually produces things, that actually pays people, that actually gives young people a reason to stay. The rebuild, not decline goal, genuine opportunity visualization. The last bullet did not have to be fatal, but the patient is still arguing about whether it is sick, and the clock, as it always does, keeps moving. Taking back control, the question history will answer is whether it was worth the price paid.